training, research, and capacity development in the area of health. The institute has a track record of excellent research of financial standard channeled towards relevant local and global problems. And it has complement of staff trained in various fields of studies. And the institute has numerous research and research units, among which the following stand out. We have genetics research unit, drug and cancer research unit, malaria research unit, molecular entomology, neuroscience and aging research unit, epidemiological and biostatistics research unit, neurodegeneration research unit. We have palliative care unit. A domicile in the institute is also the University of Ibadan University College Hospital Ethics Review Committee, a top research. Sorry, that was a network issue. So it was something like actually and two. That is the Ethics Research Committee in the institute. We have a director that is head of the institute, and the current director is the Professor Ikeluapo O. Ajayi, and she will give us our opening remark now. Thank you very much. Director, ma'am. Professor Ajayi, you have the floor, ma'am. Hello, Professor Ajayi.
Hello, Dr. Denji. Hello, Dr. Denji. Hello.
Sorry, I couldn't get through to Professor Ajayi. I would like to invite Professor Adimowo to give the opening remarks. Professor Ojimowo. Professor Adimowo, sir.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. On behalf of the director of the institute, I want to welcome all of you to this lecture, which is the month of September 2025. We appreciate all of you for being there to listen to this lecture. And in particular, we are grateful to the lecturer of today. And I believe strongly that continue to remember this lecture, because I believe we must be able to enrich our knowledge. So I welcome the lecturer of today. The profile of the lecturer will now be presented so that he can now lecture. So I invite Mr. Dr. Bakari. Yes, thank you very much.
My name is Ph.D. Armato, Radiology and Medical Physics at the University of Chicago, with additional appointments in the College and the University of Chicago Medicine Comprehensive Cancer Center, UCCC. He has been chair of the Committee on Medical Physics and director of the graduate program in Medical Physics, GPMP, since 2013. He has published his career as he captured in over 120 original peer-reviewed publications through the development and evaluation of computerized techniques for the quantitative analysis of medical images and the assessment of tumor response to therapy.
To everybody could find some data somewhere and do what they call AI research. The problem is that that might not be effort in research. Domain, especially in the imaging field, development and optimization and of the AI ethics in medical imaging research. So this little story just to convey that AI is everywhere, everybody is doing it, everybody thinks they can do it, but in reality, there are practical issues that have to be addressed that most people in this field are not even aware of. So let me to basics, pose the question, what is an image? Just to get us thinking about images and abstracts. So an image is just one way to present data. So here I have data presented as a chest radiograph on the left. Interestingly, that very same data is what I'm showing on the right, shown plot. And bottom line here is that what we call an image is just, most importantly, a matrix of numbers. And that matrix of numbers can be displayed in format where each element is made brightness value, or that data presented otherly that's shaded surface. That once you appreciate numerical data and in this very mathematical way, as I've shown here on the right, you begin to appreciate that there's a lot of things we can do by way of quantitative analysis for medical imaging. In this context, radiologists identify qualitative visual patterns in what we present as an image, whereas AI is designed and evaluated to identify numeric patterns in that same data. So two different ways of looking at the exact same data leads to two very different approaches to analysis of image. I can think that some faculty in my group at the University of Chicago published a read called An Intelligent Workstation for Computer-Aided Diagnosis. And back at that, you had the word intelligent wasn't intelligent, approximating the idea of computer having some quantitative objective analysis role in image interpretation, even back in 1993. The abstract of this article said that CAD involves a computerized analysis of radiographs that is used as a second opinion by the radiologist. The approach presented incorporates computer vision and, there's the word, artificial intelligence techniques and includes schemes for the analysis of lung nodules, interstitial infiltrates, and cardiomegaly on chest radiographs and massive microcalcifications mammograms. So this is the term artificial intelligence in the context of medical image analysis and medical imaging research. Having said that, AI goes back a very long way. By your context of AI into machine and also deep, rather than the larger universe of methods that could fall under the AI rubric. Today's AI very much means deep learning of some sort. And one is, of course, blue networks, which pervade a lot of these networks. There's a lot going on in this slide. I made this slide intentionally complicated. You're not meant to read anything on this slide other than I've pulled together a number of different AI networks, deep convolutional neural networks from the literature, and just put the images of those schematics in the slide for you. This is meant to represent the idea there's a lot of different network structures, a lot of architectures, all do different things, fine-tuned for different things, and not always interchangeable between different tasks, especially different tasks in medical image analysis. So let's take one example of AI in the real world, looking at a clinical problem. In this case, we'll talk about lung nodule evaluation on chest radiographs or on CT scans. Now, lung nodule evaluation has a lot of different components. We can talk about disease detection or characterization. We can talk about staging or treatment planning. We can talk about response assessment, predicting risk, assessing prognosis, or monitoring patients over time. And there were a couple papers earlier on in the AI literature for lung nodule detection. And this paper came out in Radiology in 2020 by a group in South Korea. And I was asked to write an editorial about this paper when it was published. And it was all about deep learning for lung cancer detection in chest radiography. And my editorial stated that the ultimate goal of these systems is clinical deployment after meeting regulatory requirements. Two almost certain aspects of regulatory compliance include demonstrating a level of performance at least comparable with experienced radiologists and validation on an extensive set of unbiased clinical data. So there's a lot going on in this little summary, but this was sort of my roadmap, which I think is generally accepted today for how we take AI from research to patient. the need for a high level of performance as benchmarked against radiologists, and valid, and we'll talk about these as my talk continues. So the group that published this study had over 10,000 from a screen population, but interestingly, only 10 radiographs had visible lung cancers, and they used a commercial deep learning algorithm. They obtained a sensitivity of 90% for their AI, where the radiologists in their study had only 60%, but the computer had a much higher false positive rate than the radiologists did. So then the question becomes here one of balance. What's more important, sensitivity or false positive rate, or both? And how do you compare methods that have different values for these important clinical metric benchmarks? This group did do an important thing in their article. They published some figures that show the actual thought process behind their AI method. And so here's on the left, is lung cancer being shown here. And in the middle panel, we see the output of their AI method. And so we see a lot of high probability pixels exactly where the lung nodule actually is. And here's for reference, the lung nodule as seen on a CT scan from the same patient. And so the important part here is that they provided some evidence that their method was doing the right thing for the right. Let's talk about that. Is highly possible to get the right answer, but for the wrong reason. Here's an example of that. This is chest radiographs, but a different study, not looking for lung nodules, but rather looking for a pneumothorax in the chest. And the region of pneumothorax, the region of air between the lung and the chest wall, is outlined here by a radiologist. So these are two images. They're the exact same images, so the exact same of truth here. But on the left, for identifying the probability, this image on the right is the probability from that same method of the pixels not case overall at a probability of pneumothorax of 0.88, a very high probability in their study, but in this case for the wrong reason. Yes, the computer thinks there's a lot of pneumothorax potentially right here, that's why I got such a high score, but that's not where the pneumothorax actually is. This is high probability over a normal region of lung because the disease is over here. So the right answer, but for the wrong reason. So this leads to evaluating and developing AI techniques and understanding them. The idea that AI is all probable. AI does not ever give you the answer. It doesn't say yes or no by itself. It doesn't say this pixel is or is not disease, or this pixel is or is not the organ of interest. It gives you instead a probability that is the likelihood of each pixel in the image belonging to your defined class, whatever that class is. Disease, pneumothorax, liver. The key is that that probability is based upon how that network was trained. So training will be developing these AI techniques, and a lot can go wrong with improper or incomplete training. Okay, so then the idea is at the end produces, we then have to threshold on those probabilities, and that's the way we binarize the class of interest, the output of the AI technique for any given task. So let's look at a couple other examples about lung nodules in the literature. Going back a few years ago in 2019, this location status in lung cancers. And so what they had 580 lung adenocarcinoma FR gene mutation, FR gene model that's been used for many years. And here's their system's performance. Using just the nodule diameter, they obtained the ROC curve Is into. So AI systems, as we all know, can get things wrong. And they can really get things. So here's on the left of an AI method that saw this image of a stop sign advanced the field. But in this case of this meta-analysis, the methods that were being published had some recognizable errors in them that led this group to believe that these methods were not going to make it into the clinic anytime soon. And so in a certain sense, the enthusiasm for publishing these AI results kind of got us ahead of the reality of the real world limitations that these methods actually presented. So we know that AI systems must be properly trained in order to perform properly. We need to reduce bias, and bias can result from small data sets, although even large data sets can have bias. Bias can result from patient populations, differences between the training sets and the test sets, model selection differences, what we call domain shift, the source of the institution from which images for training came from relative to the institution that will be using the system in a clinical setting, differences in equipment and imaging parameters, and temporal factors become a real concern as well. For example, the images of patients that were obtained before or after being vaccinated during the COVID-19 pandemic could have very real differences that impacted the performance and the training of an AI system. So changing technologies, changing patient populations or demographics, and changing disease states over time. We all know that COVID-19 went through a variety of genetic variants and mutations over time. Those presented differences in the underlying disease as presented on a chest radiograph and could be problematic if an AI system was trained on one variant of COVID-19, but then used to evaluate patients who would be more likely to have another variant of COVID-19. Let's talk about small data sets. This is one of the most common biases that AI systems get impacted by. When you're developing AI tools, you're often looking for this much data. This is a bank vault with a lot of money sitting in it. This is the kind of data you want, a really rich data set with a wide variety of cases from a wide variety of patients with a wide variety of disease presentations. But in reality, you typically only get this, a small piggy bank full of coins, and not the full, complete data set you would really like to have. And so the question becomes, how do you reconcile the difference between what you want on the left and what you get on the right? In addition to getting images, you don't just want the dollar bills, but you also want the imaging metadata. You want the year of the bill. You want the mint that it was produced at. You want clinical data. You want demographic data about the patients. You want a reference standard, perhaps, provided by a radiologist. You may need patient level, image level, or lesion level labels done by a radiologist to identify where the disease is, or how extensive the disease is on some rating scale. And then, of course, another element is these expert annotations for the reference standard, all being part of the same desire to get a reference against which to train the AI system, and then against which to eventually test and evaluate the performance numerically of that system. So these data sets aren't just images, but a lot of other data as well that often get overlooked when collecting images for training and testing AI systems. One solution to this is so-called public data sets. The idea that if each of us in our own institution tries to collect a large data set, we're really only going to get a piggy bank full of data. The only way to do this, to get a larger amount of data and to address the other data that we want that I just discussed in the prior slide, is to have a group effort to compile a public data set. And one really large state-of-the-art data set that's still under development now is the so-called MIDRIC data set. This is the Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center. The aim of MIDRIC is to foster machine learning innovation through data sharing for rapid and flexible collection, analysis, and dissemination of imaging and associated clinical data by providing researchers with unparalleled resources in the fight against COVID-19. So this began back in 2020. The mission has since expanded to other diseases, long COVID, cancer now, I believe brain diseases. And so what MIDRIC has developed is an infrastructure for collecting images from a wide number of clinical settings around the US, running them through a process of curation to ensure data integrity, and then make them publicly available through a searchable web interface. And so if you're looking for data for your own AI research, midric.org is the place to go. It's a freely available to all. And the number of cases right now in this system, I think, is over 150,000 chest radiographs and chest CT scans. So the focus is very much on the chest, but like I mentioned, there are other modalities and other anatomic regions are becoming part of the MIDRIC collection. One thing we can do with large public data sets is to come up with grand challenges. And these grand challenges are important to advance science and to advance AI research and development because they allow for a comparison of different algorithms in a very direct way. All the algorithms that participate in a grand challenge are all playing by the same set of rules. They're all working on a common set of images that are part of the challenge. They all report their output in a standard way, and they're all evaluated relative to the test set in the challenge with a uniform scoring and performance assessment metric. And the key here is that, the development of methodologies, the benefits, the weaknesses of those methods are reported in the literature. And the literature becomes the mechanism by which we advance science, we improve on prior techniques and approaches. But one problem with the literature is we can't always understand or know how one algorithm developed at one institution with one set of cases reporting a certain performance level actually in the real world would compare to a different algorithm by a different group with different images, even though they report their performance as well. Because importantly, the cases that those two methods were trained and tested on were different. And we don't know if the cases may have been easier that the one algorithm used versus the other, or more extensive or more robust references from a radiologist between the two. So it turns out that the literature is great for reporting what we've been able to achieve and how we did it, but the literature is not very good for head-to-head comparisons of different methods. Grand challenges make that possible by having all this commonality that the groups participate in. Same images, same rules, same assessment metrics. In addition, people who organize challenges, like I've been involved with challenge organization for MIDRIC. I'm actually the director of the Grand Challenges component of the MIDRIC consortium. We provide a database of images common to all people who participate. We provide a way to train and test those AI algorithms that are developed by people around the world who participate. We establish the performance assessment metrics, and we report out the results in a common way that allows for a direct comparison between the groups that participate. The most recent challenge that we published through MIDRIC is the so-called MRAL Mastermind Challenge. And this is AI to predict localized COVID severity on chest radiographs. And here's what that looked like. We asked groups to develop AI methods that would assign a so-called MRAL score to each of the chest radiographs in our tests and validation sets. And here's an example of a chest radiograph. And what we do with the MRAL score, this has been published in the literature. It stands for Modified Radiographic Assessment of Lung Edema. And it's basically a kind of pseudo-quantitative approach to assessing how severe pulmonary disease is in chest radiographs. And so what is done by a radiologist, who typically assigns an MRAL score in a clinical setting, is they look at the right lung, they look at the left lung. They assign a 0 to 4 score for the extent of the disease in the lung, and they assign a 1 to 3 score with regard to how dense the disease is in that lung. Those scores are then multiplied and added, and we get the overall IAMRAT score, which has a value on the range of 0 to 24. So the goal of this challenge was to have groups use our MIDRIC images to develop AI systems that assign an IAMRAT score to the chest radiographs. We had a training phase in April of 2023. The validation phase began in June of 2023, and a test phase was 10 days in July of 2023, where the groups submitted their Dockerized code to us, and we ran that Dockerized code on the test set, which was held back and not made known to the participants. We had a group of annotators, a group of radiologists who went through all of our 2,000 plus training cases, all of our almost 200 validation cases, and all of our 814 test cases, and actually assigned themselves IAMRAT score according to their clinical expertise and their familiarity with how those scores are used in chest imaging. And so that became the reference standard against which our participants' methods were evaluated. And just as an example, we had a web interface, we had a web interface that was used by the radiologists to assign their IAMRAT scores, and we provided some benchmarking of what those scores should look like. So here's an example of one lung of a chest radiograph with no extensive disease involvement, with 0 to 25%, 51 to 75%, and greater than 75% of the lung occupied by disease. And here's an example of a case with no density, with hazy density, with a moderate density pattern, and with a dense density pattern. So we gave all of our 22 radiologist annotators a visual reference as to how the score should work and how those numbers should be assigned to come up with an IAMRAT score. So the collection of those IAMRAT scores became the reference standard against which participants were evaluated in their system performance. As I mentioned before, this data came from the MIDRIC data set, the open collection. So data.midric.org shows a dashboard of cases available. One can filter by different parameters and get cases that then are freely available for download. So midric.org or data.midric.org is a place for you to go for your own, to prepare and obtain your own data sets for any chest imaging you may be involved with. Okay, one thing we're very much concerned about with these challenges is the demographics. I mentioned before about bias in AI, and making sure that the system is trained and tested on cases that it might actually find in the real world is very important. So we came up with a very strict set of demographics from which we collected our cases in accordance with these distributions to be able to then be used in the challenge. And again, we care about demographics because AI systems can be biased by patient population. We talked about small data sets before, and this is an example of how the patient population can impact a AI system and bias it in a way that may not be intended. And so we want to make sure that the AI systems we use and the ones that we were having groups develop around the world for this challenge were properly trained for the real world, for real world patient populations that these methods actually might encounter in the clinic. And so what we did for our challenge, for the IAMRAT challenge, was to get a patient population across our training, validation, and test sets that had demographics that were consistent with the US Census. And that's how we defined the distributions of race, of age, and so on that we targeted for both our testing cases and our training cases. And here's the results. So one result from the grand challenge we conducted. What we see on the x-axis is the IAMRAT reference score that was assigned by the radiologist panel. And then this is just for one method. This is the winning group. And so here are the AI captured IAMRAT scores from the winning group in this challenge. And here's the line of identity. And what we see here is a trend that's linear with that line of identity, but the scores from the AI system are still have a wide distribution across possible scores. So despite the fact that this system won, you can see that there's a lot of variability. And then you question, is this system ready for clinical implementation if its output looks like this? Despite being the best method from the metric we used across all participating groups, is this ready to go on for clinical implementation? And here are the overall quadric weighted kappa scores for the first 9, or actually we had 9 teams in total participate in the test phase. So here are all the scores of all 9 teams. The winning score got a weighted kappa of 0.88. And here is the weighted kappa for comparison across the different radiologists who assigned the MREL score. So we're actually seeing, not a lot of agreement among the radiologists themselves, but yet the automated methods are performing, at a much higher level when compared against the mean reference that was established by the radiologists. So there's some interesting things to look into based upon these data that are being shown here. All right, let's talk briefly before I conclude about the ethics of AI in radiology. There was a report that came out in 2019 from these societies around the world for how to deal with ethics of AI in radiology. That was the title of the report. And some elements of this report are so important, I'm going to actually read them to you here. But this group said that ethical use of AI in radiology must respect the ethical principles of humanity, the protection of human subjects of biomedical and behavioral research, and mandates of public reason. So there's a lot going on in that opening sentence of this report. But it really establishes how important ethics is according to these groups. They also say that while AI promises to improve quality, patient outcomes, and efficiency and decrease costs, it will also produce new possibilities, consequences, which could, of course, be both positive and negative, and questions for both patients and the radiology community. These issues will be shaped as much by the community's ethics as by technical factors. And so here we see the expression of AI and ethics in AI being both systems and well-curated public databases and grand challenges can provide a tremendous resource for AI research and development. And the key here really is well-curated. This is not meant to be a crowdsourced the repository where people just throw their images into this repository, but there needs to be some element of quality assurance and curation that goes into those repositories in order to make them useful for AI researchers and to protect against future bias that those AI systems may introduce from using public data sets. So it's all related together in terms of the upfront effort to curate these databases and the downstream expectation that biases, or at least some of them, may be reduced with well-curated public data sets. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, you have a question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very lovely. So I think we should welcome some questions now, both on the chat box and also by raising of hands. So the lecturer will respond to them. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I have my chat open, so if people want to type a question in chat, I can read them. Yes, please. I see, John, your hand is raised.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your very illuminating lecture. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Very good. Now, do you think there is a place for quality assurance in the implementation of AI in radiology? And if so, how do you implement this in your practice?
Yes, this is a very good question. Quality assurance is absolutely essential. I mentioned quality assurance in the context of developing these public databases that people can train and test their methods on, but QA in the clinic is a whole different concept. And when we get to the point, as we are now, where companies are rolling out these AI methods, they're being purchased and being implemented in a clinical setting in radiology and in medical physics, there needs to be absolutely a local quality assurance process that each clinic undergoes to ensure that not only is the device, the AI system, working as advertised by the manufacturer, but also that it works on the patient demographics that you're likely to see in your clinic. And that was the idea of trying to make sure that's the idea of domain shift, where AI systems are designed with one collection of cases, but when they get implemented in the clinic, they see a whole different patient demographic that they weren't trained on. And that domain shift results in reduced performance, results in bias, and can result in errors. I know groups like the AAPM, the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, and the ACR, the American College of Radiology, are working on, or maybe just about to publish, some suggested best practices for conducting AI of commercial systems in a local clinic. So look out for those publications as a way to provide guidance for what you may want to do in your clinic. So looking at the chat, how should AI generated data be treated in academia? AI generated. So if you're thinking about, well, that's that's a very loaded question. I think that AI generated data should be used really with caution. Going back to the one caution slide that I had, I think this is a big caution for AI generated data. I think for use in academia, there could be value in it. People are using AI-generated data to train AI systems. That seems to be kind of a circular argument that might lead to complete chaos later. But there is likely a role for that if it's done in a logical and scientifically sound way. So I think the answer is AI-generated data should be used for research in a very careful and deliberate way, where we don't just use that data as a way of increasing our training set, but we use that data and understand how it could potentially negatively impact our results when we train with that data. So I hope that answers your question. Another question in the chat, is important to understand and have the knowledge of the disease instead of total dependency on AI. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that what has to happen, and I think explainable AI is an important element of this, in order, not just looking at the output of the method, and it's looking at 88% of being a lung cancer, but looking at some behind the scenes information like those heat maps I showed you in that one example of pneumothorax. Those are sometimes called saliency maps or probability maps or P maps. Those provide the underlying probabilities in some numeric way that each pixel represents the thing that the AI was being asked to identify. And by presenting those output images along with the final number value from the AI system, that could help the radiologist understand why the AI system got the answer it got, and that will allow the radiologist to have more confidence in the output, or recognize when the output is wrong, and be able to override the AI output. So I think that's going to be a key with regards to understanding the disease itself. I think, let me give an example of this. I think that self-driving cars are going to become a huge worldwide problem. And here's why. Because by the time we get to a world where we have more self-driving cars than not, we will have drivers or people in those cars that have no experience driving. If the computer, the AI system, were to make a mistake, there would be no way for the person in the car to override the computer, because the person in the car will have had zero experience driving themselves. They will have zero experience with the kinds of decisions and timing judgments that have to be made by a driver. And if the computer is fooled by something, likely the human in the car will not have that experience over thousands of hours of driving to overrule the computer. The same thing I think is true with radiology. If we overly rely on AI to do these tasks, then the next generation of radiology residents are not going to have the thousands of exams and the thousands of hours of analyzing those exams, those images, to be able to know when the AI system has gotten it wrong. And then we'll end up in a world where we're completely dependent upon AI to drive the car, and we as people can't do anything about it, or AI completely dependent upon AI to interpret images, and we as humans can't do anything about it. Despite being trained radiologists, we won't have that level of experience to overrule the computer. So I think knowledge of the disease, knowledge of the imaging physics, and knowledge of the complete imaging chain is still going to be essential for radiologists to use AI. An article came out a couple of years ago by a radiologist at Stanford, Dr. Kurt Langwatz, and his commentary was that AI will not replace radiologists, but radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't use AI. And I think that's the kind of message that I'm trying to get across here. Okay, disease. The challenge. Yeah, I think that the challenge of mistrust in AI models by medical practitioners kind of goes along with what I was just saying. I think I was responding to that question as well. The practitioners have to understand the disease themselves and the physics of the imaging device themselves, and they have to be made aware of what the AI is thinking somehow. And the presentation of these saliency maps to the radiologist will be an important way for them to encourage trust in the AI when it's warranted, and recognize when not to trust the AI. So that, I think, those two concepts will go together nicely to improve or to reduce mistrust and improve trust in the AI models. Is the human superior to the AI? That's a good one. It's interesting because the problem is that humans are qualitative, right? We see things visually. We're not looking at numbers. If you think back to that one image I showed early on, I showed you a chest radiograph presented as an image, and I showed you that same data presented as a surface. If you showed a radiologist that surface representation of the data, they wouldn't be able to provide any interpretation of what's going on there. But because these data get presented as visual images for the radiologist to visually and qualitatively evaluate, they're really good at doing that. However, mathematical techniques like computer techniques like AI depend upon the underlying numbers. And a radiologist will never be able to differentiate an image pixel that has a value of 312 from a neighboring pixel with the value of 311, right? That's never going to be the kind of differences a human can distinguish visually. But the computer can make that distinction. That's a real difference that the computer can use to evaluate the images. So I don't know that I would say, there's a lot of questions coming through, this is great. I don't know if I would say that AI is superior to the humans or the humans are superior to the AI. But the AI is working with the information at a different level than is available to or even interpretable by the radiologist. I think ultimately the radiologist is superior. I mean, the radiologist is the one who would be able to identify when the AI makes mistakes. We all know about the idea of AI hallucinations. So humans are still superior to AI. But AI has the advantage of being able to work with numeric values that people don't work with very well. Yeah, so barriers to AI adoption and how is it being used in radiology right now? I think there are a lot of commercial systems that incorporate AI into image interpretation in some way. Another thing to think about, though, is that it's not the use of AI in radiology is not just for image interpretation, but it can be used for things like workflow, like using AI to make sure that when you schedule patients, that the scheduling is efficient, that putting this patient in this room at that scanner is the most appropriate place to put that patient given the disease that's being evaluated. Maybe the scanner over in this room is a better scanner for that patient because it has higher resolution or it's a faster scanner, and this patient has a difficult time holding their breath. And so AI can play I think does currently play a very important role in workflow and optimization of the logistics of a radiology department. At the back end, there's AI being developed to help interpret and analyze radiology reports that are written by humans, but then AI summaries or AI extracting information that might be useful to indicate a second exam ought to be done or the next steps in the patient workup to report back to the referring physician. There's AI going there as well. So even though I focused here on AI and image interpretation, there's a lot more roles for AI potentially in radiology, in radiology clinical care. Okay, let's see. Interesting. So computational image analysis help optimize the knowledge of AI radiology for radiology training. I think that's a real benefit of AI is being able to use AI, having radiology residents, trainees in radiology, understand the AI model. So I think this is an important point that pervades all of this. We need to make sure that the people who use the AI understand how to use it, understand what's being done, understand the limitations, understand the main benefits, and not just simply use the AI as a black box. I think if radiologists use the AI as a black box, that's not going to be a good situation, and we're going to basically, turn ourselves over to the machine effectively. I don't think anyone wants to do that. So I think that having radiologists understand AI is going to be a useful thing. So talking about trainees, making sure that the residents understand the AI systems being used at that clinic and all the pitfalls and benefits is going to be an important aspect of training. So absolutely there's a role for AI in training radiologists. Yeah, so about the biases about these AI tools outside of Africa is absolutely an issue. And I think I don't have any quick response as to how that can be mitigated, other than I think that I think manufacturers of these devices have to be aware of their clinical markets, and they have to be aware of the patient demographics in those markets. And so while I talked before about the demographics across the US being part of how we crafted our data set for the challenge, the same thing is true in any other country around the world, and maybe even more local at a local level. I mean, the demographics of patients here in Chicago is different than the demographics of patients in a rural American town. And so it's not just US-based demographics that we need to be planning for and training for, but the local demographics at each site that an AI system might be implemented in a clinical setting. And any country, any city, any rural area in Africa would be no different, having to make sure that the system is properly trained and QA'd on the demographics in those countries. I think all I'm doing is restating the problem and restating the question, so I apologize for not being able to formulate an answer, but it's a real concern. And maybe we can talk more about that later. Maybe through the assistance of like the American College of Radiology or the AAPM. I'm actually an officer of the AAPM. There may be a role in those organizations to help the question here, making sure, like with our own international efforts with the AAPM, making sure that one of our international efforts is to bring awareness to AI tools needing to be trained or adaptable to markets outside of Europe, outside of the US. So that's a great point. A group is developing CPU-based deep learning to evaluate cardiomegaly using cardiothoracic ratio at about 3,000 chest radiographs. How reliable is an AI model developed from a CPU? I think there are a lot of different ways of doing it. I don't know the benefits or the limitations of CPU-based algorithms, but I think at this point, a lot of AI is sort of trial and error, right? You take one architecture you think might work, and you develop it, then you train it and you test it. If it doesn't work the way you think, then you change the parameters, you retrain, and you do set analyses. But ultimately, at some point, you may realize that a specific architecture, CPU or otherwise, isn't going to give you the performance you need, and you move on to something else, or you develop something else, or you augment the applicability of the method you began with. So I think that's kind of the state we're in now. There may be AI methods that get trained to identify which AI models might be best appropriate for a given task. But right now, we're not there yet. And a lot of this is trial and error. I think the bottom line is, if the CPU-based method works, then that's great. But again, the same rules apply, making sure the training is done properly, making sure you're aware of potential biases in training, and making sure the testing is done in a way consistent with the way training was done, no matter what system, what architecture you use for your model. Okay, can AI capture all diseases in Africa? Yeah, so I think this is where, looking at other diseases in Africa, because the systems are not designed in Africa, I think this is where, your awareness of AI and you having this lecture series, for example, and you having the research institute that you have there is really key. I think that we need to collaborate around the world, not just with an American center or a European center, but European centers need to collaborate amongst themselves, and with Asian centers and African centers. We all, this needs to be a global initiative, I guess is what I'm getting at. Without this being a global initiative, I don't think there will ever be a solution that would be globally applicable. And so we all need to collaborate. Maybe we need to come up with some international consortia that help get researchers around the world together to develop AI in a culturally representative way that allows these systems to handle diseases and patient demographics around the world. But I think this is going to be a key, not easy, but I think it would be a fundamental way to overcome the underlying international biases that exist in the way that companies being in the US or in Europe or Japan typically have to address, so that they can truly have a global market and address the global patient population. Yes, exactly. So thank you for the AI CT reconstruction is an important thing as well. So I missed that aspect of AI, where AI is being used in the image formation or the image normalization process, another key element of AI. So thank you for mentioning that. How can AI handle biases that can exist within algorithms in order to maintain transparency and accountability for AI systems? I think that's a responsibility that will fall on developers to incorporate and will fall on users or purchasers of these systems to demand that the companies provide that information for them. This is, a very well integrated issue that goes both in the training and testing as well as clinical use. And I think everybody involved is going to have to be responsible for being open about what those biases might be within the algorithms, and either provide that knowledge and or provide workarounds and or provide some numeric factors that might be brought in to the output when certain images are used as input because of a known bias that's inherent. So I think we're all responsible for demanding that issue be addressed in an open way. Okay, let's see. Differences between radiomics and AI research, or can radiomics data be used to develop AI models? Yeah, so that's a good question. Radiomics and AI, I would say, practically are two different things. With radiomics, you as the coder, you as the developer of the algorithm, are identifying the mathematical relationships that you're exploring among the values of the image pixels. And you're using those mathematical relationships to look at image texture, to look at the size or the circularity or the shape of structures or disease of interest. And you're using those mathematical formulas and shape-based formulas to capture differences that might exist between a benign lung nodule and a malignant lung nodule. But to do that with radiomics, you have to tell the system where the lung nodule is. So the first step of almost all radiomics-based methods is to do image segmentation, to isolate, hopefully automatically or maybe semi-automatically, the disease region or the anatomy of interest. If it's the liver, draw the liver. If it's a brain tumor, draw the brain tumor. And then the radiomics is computed mathematically from the pixels within the defined region. We know what we're trying to capture mathematically when we use radiomics. But we have this upfront step to locate the disease of interest. In AI, we don't really know what AI is doing. It's a black box, so that's a little bit of a negative compared to radiomics. But with AI, we use the entire image for training. We can do segmentation first, but oftentimes the initial step of segmentation is not needed, and you just put the entire image into the system, train it on the entire image, and then get the output from the testing as a result. And so they are different from that regard. And yeah, that's the main differences between radiomics and AI, just very briefly. Okay, and then the last question I've got going here is, does AI capture genetic differences in disease prognosis and drug treatment outcome? So I guess the global answer to that is AI can be trained to do anything we want, or we can try to get AI trained to do anything we want. But we need to be able to provide enough training cases to make that possible. And so if you're thinking about AI capturing genetic differences, they're not going to capture genetic differences based upon radiologic imaging. In the study I mentioned before with lung cancer, looking at EGFR genes mutation status, that is part of a concept known as imaging genomics or radiogenomics. And it's not that the method, whether it's AI or radiomics or anything else for computer vision, it's not that the method is actually assessing the underlying genetics, because that can't be seen or known from a medical image. What it does, though, is it tries to capture differences, subtle numeric differences with small number changes that a radiologist can't see, that might exist in tumors with one type of gene versus tumors with a different type of gene. So it's not that we're detecting the gene differences, it's that we're detecting the actual structural differences in the tumor that might result from gene 1 versus gene 2. So that's what we're trying to analyze, and that's what that group was trying to analyze. They weren't looking for EGFR mutations in the imaging. That can't be done. But they're looking at imaging differences, texture differences, radiomics differences, shape, size differences that are the result biologically of those two different genes, of the gene mutation. And they're looking at, prognosis, yes. And so the same thing is true. More aggressive tumors might appear differently on the CT scan in a way that AI can figure out, but that a human visual system might not be able to understand. So disease prognosis comes from those differences, and treatment outcomes is the same thing. The idea of maybe a lung cancer that will respond to this drug looks differently on the CT scan than a lung cancer that won't respond to that drug. And by using AI or radiomics to figure that out, looking at subtle numeric differences that can't be visualized by a human, that's how we use AI to look at genetics and prognosis and response to therapy. So, okay, good. I'm glad you like that response. This has been great. Any other questions? Anybody? If you raised your hand, I'm not sure if you already did a chat question, but I'm happy to have you jump in and ask me a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samuel Armato. It's a pleasure listening to you. Am I audible?
Yes, I hear you. Thank you very much.
Am I audible? All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for your brilliant delivery. I just have a little add-ons to some of the comments and the submissions that you had made. First and foremost is the point on improving outputs from AI interpretations of medical imagings, and that is going to be in respect of colorimetrics that are being used, because AI, you know, it works based on the data that you feed into it. So the quality of the data, medical images that are fed, is very, very important. Then the second point is the configuration of the AI model. Developers have to improve upon the algorithms with which they model their AI tools. Those are the important areas of concerns that we have to leverage upon now. Then in addition, in the developing climes, there are lots of issues regarding acceptance of AI model. But the truth is, AI has come to stay and we must accept AI. But the point is the domestication or the reproducibility of some of the nuances that you are having in the high resource settings and domesticating into developing climes is another area of concern that we may have to start working upon now. By and large, thank you for your brilliant delivery. Over to you.
Good, thank you very much. I appreciate those. Yeah, I appreciate those comments. Thank you very much. That's exactly right. Those are very important global issues and general issues with AI that we need to be focusing on. Always keep those in the forefront of our minds as we develop these things. Any other questions?
Hello. I don't know if I'm audible enough. Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Sorry, my question is revolving around, it's more like a follow-up question from the question given by some, I think one of the participants talking about biases with AI systems that don't actually have Africans or African Americans incorporated. Now, does image augmentation to create more images for the models to train from? Does it create any form of biases? And if so, how can it be managed? Because if these manufacturers don't have access to data from African countries, how are they able to train the models, to create systems that are able to either detect or classify? Now, I'm going to come from a classification standpoint. Peradventure, I want to classify a particular disease into its subclasses, and I have about 500 images of one particular class, and I have about 100 or 200 for the other class. Now, there is a class imbalance. Now, I'm planning on using image augmentation in order to fill in the space. But my image augmentation method is more like flipping, zooming, and the rest. So now, this creates like repetitive images, of existing image. And under some certain lectures I've been to, image augmentation is sometimes frowned upon, stating with the statement that it's as if you're like duplicating the same image over and over again. So now, and according to them, it creates a bias where the model doesn't exactly learn something new, rather it's just repeating. So now, if image augmentation is not the way, or if it is the only way for now, how can it be managed, and what other methods are out there that I'm probably not aware of? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great study that you're working on, and an important point with or data augmentation. I would agree that I think image augmentation has a role if you're creating a pilot study, kind of a proof of principle, to see if what you're thinking about has any hope of working. Because those, like you mentioned, the augmented data is just a variation of an existing case, and you're going to end up with training cases that are correlated, and you're not going to get independent information from each of the training cases. And the idea is that every case you use for training is going to provide independent information for the architecture of the network to be developed in a way that is able to recognize new cases. But if you have repetitions of the same case through that augmentation, you're not getting that independence in the trained network. So a lot of people use the idea of transfer learning from other domains. That might not be applicable to what you're doing, but that's something to look into. That's been around for a while. There is another, I can't recall the other technique that's becoming more popular, but one thing for you to do in your study is maybe, as opposed to augmenting 200 cases to match, I think you said 500 cases of one class and 200 of the other, maybe the thing to do initially, again, as you go through a pilot study to assess the feasibility of what you're trying to work on, maybe take your 500 cases down to a random sampling of 200, and then you'll have a matched cohort, 200 of each, and just see what happens. Obviously, you're throwing away cases, which we don't like to do, but that would at least give you mathematically and statistically a direct comparison of how your method does between the two classes. And what you could do is you could do that multiple times with different random samplings of 200 from the larger data set. So that may be an initial way to start, more in a brute force way without using any elegant AI techniques, but that may be a way to go.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Well, thanks. I don't see any more questions in chat or hands raised. So thank you very much for your attention. I really enjoyed talking with you. Oh, well, the question, Ike. EK?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is Ike. Just to thank you. I know you've really delivered a very illuminating lecture, but to thank you for really accepting to give this lecture. And I'm sure you are also very happy as to the audience and how you must have impacted good knowledge to us all. So I just want to thank you. And we look forward to continuing with you and you coming up again to teach us more about AI. For my colleagues, I'm I thank you all. So I just say that I'm handing over to them. It's just that I couldn't start off with you. So they would also conclude. But now that I have the opportunity, I say I should thank you because you just accepted at once after we met. And I'm so happy that the Vatican group is also there with us and the network at the University of Chicago. Thank you very much, just to say that. So please, Professor Akinyemi and Professor Adimowo, please continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ike. I appreciate it. Thank you. It was nice to meet you in Chicago. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Armato, for a very illuminating and lucid brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. Looking to the platform, we have a lot of imaging experts, multi-generations on the call on this webinar. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Vincent Obajimi, a very revered teacher, retired but not tired. Thank you for coming, and several other distinguished members of the radiology and medical imaging family. Professor Benjamin Aribisala leads PI for the Vatican group. Would you like to make a brief comment, Prof? Benjamin. Okay. Probably has left, but he was also on the call. Well, all I need to do is just to, on behalf of the members, the faculty here at the Institute for Advanced Medical Research and Training, to thank you once again for accepting to speak at this monthly webinar. And also want to appreciate everyone, leaders, past directors, and other leaders, and other people who have joined from different geographical regions. And I will also appreciate those who have asked questions and made comments that made the webinar really interactive. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming. And another edition of the webinar will be in the offing the last week of the month of October. Thank you very much, everyone. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for your attention.
Oh, great.
No attendance?